All right, welcome back to the Gill Athletics Connections podcast, the podcast that goes around the world, getting just amazing people and coaches in the track and field community and just uplifting and honoring what they do. And we're just so blessed that you would join us here again. Once again, we're doing this weekly, season 4. Can't believe we're doing season 4. Today is a fun one. This will be the first guest we've had that I had an action figure of. I don't want to say growing up because I don't want to age him that bad, but as a high schooler, I definitely had this amazing little doll of this amazing person here. Help me welcome the wise, the wonderful Mr. Dan O'Brien. Dan, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Mike. Thank you. I appreciate the wise. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out. I give everybody the benefit of the doubt. I am impressed. If I had an action figure of myself, it would be front and center everywhere I go. I don't see it anywhere here in the office.
They're hard to find. I don't know if you still have it, but I'll send you one still in the box. It's really funny when I get those as well, because they came out after the 96 Olympics. Mm-hmm. And, I'll go to the Milrose games and people will bring them there and have me sign them. And they're still in really great shape. I had one, Michael Johnson had one. Mm-hmm. Ours look very similar to one another. So the detail's not great, but no, it's fun to say, hey man, I got an action figure out of it.
Yeah, I unfortunately, I moved a lot in my career until I got here to Gill, and so I unfortunately have lost it. You talk about the technology. Technology's gotten a little bit better. I bet they look better today, and we need to do more. I love that they did that. I also had, who was the old school hurdler that they had? Yeah, gosh, I still remember because the way. Who's that?
Edwin Moses, maybe?
No, old, like.
Oh.
Wish I could remember who it was, like in the 30s, 40s kind of guy. I can't remember.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what my memory tells me. Someone's yelling at us right now, listening and saying, yeah, it's so and so. But yeah, Michael Johnson, it was amazing. We need to do more stuff like that for track and field, more baseball card type stuff, more action figures. We need more of that.
Bobbleheads. There we go.
Well, okay. Well, I won't even comment there. I'm not gonna say it. Well, Dan, thanks for being on the show. I thought, I love bringing different perspectives to our audience. We have a cadre, an amazing back library of awesome people who choose to be track coaches. And while you have coached some in your career, you have a very unique aspect with your athletic side. We're not going to get too much into your athletic career because it's been well recorded. And boy, if you are listening now and you don't know Dan's athletic career, first of all, are you in track? I mean, come on now. But just Google his name and just fantastic career. But something that helped guide you to this amazing athletic career that you had were really some phenomenal coaches. So I thought it'd be interesting to take some time and talk about some of the coaches that have poured into your life. We typically talk to the coach, so I'm kind of flipping around and let's hear from the athlete side of things. So maybe we start, Dan, the decathlon's not typically something we do in high school. If you were a shot putter all the way, it would have been like, oh, who introduced you to the shot put in high school? I'm assuming you were not introduced to the decathlon in high school. You correct me. How did we get going into the actual decathlon?
Well, that's a great question. And I love the fact that this show concentrates on coaches. And if it weren't for some fantastic coaches, I not only would have not gotten into the decathlon, I wouldn't have been able to win world championships and Olympic gold medals. But, I ran track and field in junior high. Okay. So I have an interesting story, and, I started in sports, Little League baseball, and then I got introduced to basketball in the 5th grade. But the first race I ever ran, I won. And it was a mile run, fun run for kids at a homecoming football game. The whole day was filled with activities. The 10 and 11-year-olds lined up, boom, the gun went off. Next thing I know, me and another kid are out front, and I out sprint him to the line. And then they give you a big ribbon at the halftime of the football game. And I thought, this is glorious. I'm good at something, because I was very average at baseball. But as I got through junior high, I joined the track team just to be with my friends, and they put me with the long distance runners. And because that's just where my buddies were. It's like, what do you want to do? Oh man, I'll run the mile, I'll run the 2 mile with these guys. And one day, and it was agonizing. I absolutely hated it.
Sure.
One day I was coming in from a long run, sprinted to the line, and the coach said, why don't you run with the quarter milers? And I started in with the sprinters, and I never looked back. But when I got into high school, I was really following a lot of great high school sprinters and track and field kids at Henley High School in Southern Oregon. All right. I grew up in Klamath Falls, Oregon, and my mom had a rule that if I got anything lower than a C in a class, I couldn't participate in the sport of that quarter.
Mhm.
All right. And we were on the quarter system. And I remember over the winter quarter, I got a D in social studies, which was just unacceptable. My dad, he really could have cared less if I, if I stayed out of track. He wanted me to, just play sports. But my mom withheld me from track. And so that 9th grade year, I had to walk past the track every day to get home or ride my bike. And it just hurt me. I see all my buddies out there and all my friends. And I just thought, oh, this is just, I never wanted to do that again. But I had a pottery teacher by the name of Larry Hunt, big, tall guy, like 6'9". He loved track and field. And so Larry, I would see him, during the pottery hour. And he said, look, I want you to bring your social studies homework in. I'm going to help you get your grade up. Let's make sure that you're taking notes correctly and all this stuff. And so he really went out of his way to help me. And after the school year was done, he came out to my house and he sat with my mother and he said, Mrs. O'Brien, Dan's got his grade up. I would love for him to participate in a summer decathlon. And I didn't know what the decathlon even was,
Oh,
but
wow.
Larry went out of his way, sat with my mother and said, look, I'd like to train him for 4 weeks and do this Southern Oregon State decathlon. And at that point, I didn't care what the track and field event was. I was just going to get to participate because I hadn't played sports in about 10 weeks. So Larry and I, each day, we would be on the track and he would pick 2 events. I would pick 2 events and we would practice and compete against each other. And Larry was still a fairly young guy at the time, and he could do quite a few things. So I would pick the events that I knew I could beat him in, and he would pick the events that he knew I needed to work on. All right. So it was kind of this battle, I want to beat him in some events, and he was trying to make me better in a lot of events. But what was cool about the decathlon is I was trying things for the very first time. I long jumped, I pole vaulted a little bit my freshman year, or excuse me, my 8th grade year. And then as I got into high school, I didn't really know what events I was going to be in. But the first time I ever hurdled was in preparation for the decathlon. Wow. And they put the hurdles up and the coach said, here's how you do it. And I came out of the blocks and I 3-stepped the very first time. And the coach looked at me and I said, is that right? And he was just like, oh yeah, that's correct. And so right away, I was showing that I had some, I had some, skills to do the event. I was the kind of kid that'd go down to the shot put or the discus or the javelin and just pick it up and say, hey, let me try it. Let me just throw this thing around. Let me see if I can throw it. And so everything kind of just fell into place and fit just a little bit. There was a lot of work, but I was showing just natural ability.
Was Larry one of the track coaches?
Yes, Larry was.
So okay. Larry, I was about to say, why in the world did he? I mean, this was quite amazing. And I love this. We talk a lot of times about, these small forks in the road when we're younger that we really don't think about, getting a D in history. Maybe you wouldn't have gone into decathlon. Maybe you just, you'd been a sprinter and did track that year. Here's Larry, who could have, Larry Hunt, who could have easily said, hey, yeah, you need to study and we'll see you next year. But took this interest and I love the interest in the decathlon. And I mean, what an influence Larry Hunt had on track and field, not just Dan O'Brien, by the way, track and field. He affected all of track and field because of this.
Well, and what's interesting is he was like West Coast Frank Zaranowski. He loved the stats. He followed everything. But as we got training, I realized he loved the decathlon. All right. And so one of the first stories he told me, and I didn't know what the decathlon was, but he described it as this was the event that Bruce Jenner made famous, but he was keeping score at the 1976 Olympic trials. And he said he was ahead of the scorers. So when Bruce Jenner broke the world record at the Olympic trials, he was the first guy to tell Jenner that he had broken the record. Wow. And so Larry was one of these guys who throughout the years would send me just pages and pages of stats. Well, here's what Tim Bright did, at the community college championships. This is what Dave Johnson's doing. Look how you stack up. And I mean, there were rows and rows and columns of just stats. And so I realized that Larry was more than just a track coach. He was a track buff. And he was the guy who got me into decathlon.
Huh. Who else did you continue doing the decathlon through high school? Was it Larry all the way through, or were there other, I'm gonna call them not side coach, more specific coaches? Like, did you ever like, oh yeah, then this sprint coach came in or this pole vault coach came in?
So Larry was he was kind of a jack of all trades coach. And as I got, after I got through that first decathlon, I said, that was so hard, I'm never doing it again. And lo and behold, the next year rolled around, then I did it again. And then the next year rolled around, then I did it again. And I found myself at the Junior Olympics in Los Angeles in 1984.
Mm.
And the Junior Olympics were going on at the same time as the Olympic trials.
Mm.
And so literally the decathlon 100 meters ran, and then it was like men's first round of the 100 meters, 100 meters elite right after us. And I'm like, I'm in a warm-up area with Carl Lewis. I couldn't believe it. But Larry was, he was my hurdle coach. He helped me with some field events. But our head coach at the time, his name was Ron Smith. He's won so many state championships, team titles and individual titles. And then our football coach, and this didn't thrill me, but my head football coach was the throws coach on the football team, or on the track team. And he was a hard ass. I mean, Lee Schroeder was his name, and you could see him coming a mile away. And he was the guy who he ground me into the ground. My junior year of high school, I played football. O'Brien, you're slacking, you're pacing yourself, just one of those guys. And I really appreciated him because he pushed me harder. But when it came time to run the 300-meter hurdles, he set up 350 meters. He set up 400 meters worth of hurdles. And that's how we trained. And he made me a little bit tougher. So Ron Smith was the head coach, and I think he gets all the credit, but Larry Hunt was the guy who got me into the decathlon.
Did you stay in touch with him throughout your career?
Absolutely. So Larry and I were good friends. He was the guy who helped me, prepare for college and kind of gave me some ideas on what to expect. He was throwing my name around to college coaches around the state and nearby schools and things like that. And so I was always been really grateful to him. He actually came and saw me about a month ago here in Arizona. He saw Bellbank Park, the facility, for the very first time. And he's a little bit older, and, he's struggling health-wise, but it was great to see him. But he lives in Salt Lake City. He's got like 8 kids and 100 grandkids, and he's just living life. He's got some family in Queen Creek here. But Larry was one of those guys. And honestly, as I got into the decathlon and I learned more about Frank Zaranowski, that's the kind of guy Larry was. Just a huge stats guy. And you could tell he just loves the sport of track and field. And Larry convinced me this is what I should do. And even when I went off to college, I wasn't sure that I wanted to do the decathlon, but he just kept telling me, look, this is how good you can be. This is what Gary Kinder's doing. This is what Dave Johnson's doing. This is what the best guys in the country are doing. You could be there someday.
I love hearing that story about Larry because, decathlon is one of, I think, maybe only 2 events. Other events could probably make their case, but just have this fanatical fanism around them. The multis and pole vault have their own cultures, if you will. My former, now retired boss, Fred Dixon, you mentioned the 76 Olympic trials, that's all, Fred, that's all we would talk about. We would be at NCAAs and, the kid would set the college 100-meter record and it would all be like, how many points that would be in the decathlon, Mike? That's literally everything tied back to the multi. He only wanted to hire, I don't know how I got hired because I was not a multi, but he only wanted to hire multis. It's an amazing culture. So I love that Larry had that culture and then instilled that into you. That's amazing. Like I said, he changed the world of track, not just your world, the entire track history. Love it. You mentioned college. So where do we go after high school? You're an Oregon guy, so you go to Oregon, right? That's what every Oregon kid does.
Well, that's what you dream about. I grew up wanting to be an Oregon Duck, because of, Joaquin Cruz and, just some of those great programs that they had there. I went on a recruiting trip to the University of Oregon. I went on a recruiting trip to Oregon State University, and I was really, I didn't get the scholarship offer that I really wanted from Oregon. I got a decent scholarship offer from Oregon State, but I was glad I didn't go there because they ended up dropping the program a couple of years ago. But I had a great trip there. But when I filled out my college questionnaire, I put all the events that I had done. So not only had I done all 10 events in the decathlon, I triple jumped. I ran the 400 meters hurdles, from time to time. And so when I would send out those questionnaires, and Larry, helped me with a lot of them, I had a coach that just kept calling. Like once a week, the coach from the University of Idaho would call me. Hey, this is Mike Keller up here at Idaho. Saw your questionnaire and, wonder if you want to come up for a visit. And I was like, Idaho? I don't know if I want to go to Idaho. It just wasn't what I envisioned. So it was during the NCAA championships in 1984 that Coach Keller came to did a home visit in Klamath Falls, Oregon. He had a decathlete at the NCAA championships. It finished around 5 or 6 in the evening. He drove 4 hours to my house to Klamath Falls, Oregon.
Wow.
Talked to me for 2.5 hours. I don't think he was leaving my house until I signed my letter of intent. It was one of those. And he just said, look, you're a fantastic athlete. Look at all these different events you can do. We'd love to have you at the University of Idaho. And at the time, they kind of went back and forth, but at the time they were Division I AA in football.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, they're not even Division I, they're not even a big school, but he informed me, look, in track and field and in basketball, they're Division I. And so, I signed my letter of intent with Idaho because he gave me a full scholarship, top to bottom. That's what I needed to go to college. I wasn't going to be able to pay for school myself.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents had never gone through the process. Nobody else in my family had gone to school, gone to college. And really nobody from my school had ever, been in that process either. And so for me to kind of navigate that and understand, the recruiting process, I signed my letter of intent and just figured, that's where I'm going to school. But it was shortly after I signed my letter of intent that I got a call from Nebraska.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, hey, do you want to come out for a visit? And, it was because of Tinker Hatfield. And so Tinker Hatfield had some Nebraska connections, and he called somebody over there, and they started looking at me and watching me. But I never went on a trip to Nebraska. But after the state championships, I took my recruiting trip to the University of Idaho. Liked it. And the one thing that I liked about it is, they got this beautiful indoor facility, 300-meter indoor track. And when I was in the indoor track over in there, it made all the hurdles look low. Okay. So the 42 inches didn't seem like they were too high. And so I committed to the University of Idaho, and, in the next fall, I was on my way.
That's interesting. It's really funny. I had a totally different college you went to because of a coach who's going to come into your life here. So I didn't know actually where you went to undergrad. I'm interested, when we talk about recruiting, especially the decathlete, especially a good decathlete, there's the, I'm going to say fear that if you go to a smaller school, well, they're going to burn you out because, the decathlon is you got to be very specific on how you're doing things. You can only do so many a year. You could take that poor athlete and put them into 100 events every meet, especially at a smaller school conference. You probably did 100 events, that's going to burn you out and your athletic development is going to stall out. You already said you kind of didn't know the process anyway. You never do until you first go through it, the whole college recruiting process. Did you have any concerns going into Idaho? Like, oh man, I'm not going to do decathlon. I'm going to do 20 events every meet because of the talent level.
No, that wasn't really that wasn't my fear. But what I thought is I was going to show up day one, and I was going to show the football coach how fast I was and get him to look at some of my high school tape. And the following year, I was going to play football and run track and field. And it's funny how that just never happened or developed. I ran routes for, some quarterbacks in the summertime. And, I had guys who played wide receiver and stuff like that. But, I was never afraid of, they're going to burn me out. Mm-hmm. But my freshman year there, I struggled with grades and I redshirted. Mm-hmm. Okay. So the fall quarter, the fall semester came and went, and here we are in the spring. And so coach, and we had a really good team. God, we had a half dozen Jamaicans on the team. So we had 3 members of the Jamaican bobsled attending the University of Idaho as sprinters.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So when I got there, it was the craziest thing. I see this sled out on the track, and I said, what's that for? And it's like, hey man, we're training for bobsled. And it was just like, bobsled?
You're like, what world am I in?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely crazy. And so it's funny to watch Cool Runnings. And I knew who the John Candy character was. It was based on a guy named Trinidad. He was from Trinidad and Tobago. And then the Stokes brothers, with 2 Stokes brothers were on the team. Dudley ran track and field as well. And so it was really kind of, Dudley Stokes was the older brother and he was the driver. And so I just fell into this weird kind of, situation where it's like I was surrounded by Jamaicans and Africans my first year at the University of Idaho. They didn't need my points. But Coach Keller, he really made me, he just spent a lot of time on my technical running. I had horrible form as coming out of high school, going into college. I just drilled. But I remember I missed the world indoor 500-yard record by like 0.3 of a second. That's how much quarter mile running I did indoors. And I was running with a quarter miler by the name of Sam Kodua. And, Coach Keller, I think, just wanted to let me know that, once you get to college, it's a ton of hard work. And it certainly was. But I did do one decathlon that freshman year that I redshirted. I went down to Boise State. And again, I just wasn't sure that was the event for me. I kept fighting it. I think Coach Keller had a plan for me, but it wasn't my plan. And then the trouble started. Okay. This was really the first time that I'm away from home, and, it's easy to skip class. It's easy to go play golf. It's easy to, hit a fraternity party on a Wednesday night. And my grades really started slipping. And so the next year as a sophomore, I didn't compete because I was ineligible. And then lost my scholarship. And the year after that, I paid for my own school and still didn't complete the workload. So I was ineligible then as well. And so I had to sit out. I wasn't going to school, but I was, it's one of those situations where, I lost my scholarship. I flunked out of school, but I didn't want to go home and face everybody. And so I continued to live in Moscow, Idaho. And so I got a job. I worked in a cabinet shop, believe it or not. But all this while, believe it or not, Larry Hunt is writing me letters and sending me stats. It was pages and pages. Hang in there. You can still do it. And I think because of that, I never lost track and field. I would go to the track at the University of Idaho and sit in the top of the stands and watch track practice in the indoor facility. I still would go out on my runs. I still would lift weights when I could. And it was the type of thing where it's like, someday I'm going to get my life back on track and I'm going to get back out there. And luckily I had a couple of really good, coaches who didn't give up on me. And so, I spent a quiet winter alone in Moscow, Idaho. And I remember it was very depressing because I was alone on Christmas Day. And, but I was too embarrassed to go home and face all my family and friends and say, I'm out of school. I'm not running track. And so after that Christmas break was over, I don't know where it came from or how, but I got the courage enough to go to Coach Keller's house. And so I went to Mike Keller's house, knocked on the door, and, it's 20 degrees outside and I didn't have a car. And so I probably walked 3 miles to get there. And I just said, what can I do to get back in school? And he said, let me ask around, let me make some calls, but you got to be ready, And I said, what do you mean? He says, yeah, I might, who knows where you're going. If there's an opportunity, you need to just, put your stuff in a bag and be ready to go. And literally probably 2.5, 3 weeks later, he called me and said, the coach at Spokane Community College has a place for you. And honestly, it was just like, whew, it even today, it just touches me that, he went that far to get me back in school. And so he drove me to Spokane, dropped me off at the coach's office in Spokane, and Dwayne Hartman, got me for the spring semester in 1988.
Dan, what an amazing story of two specific. I know there's other people always involved, but Mike Keller and Larry Hunt here. You told me, suspended because of grades, and then had to, drop out because of grades. The story could have ended there. And in fact, maybe most of the time, unfortunately, the story does end right there. Coaches are like, yeah, we had this kid, Dan, he would have been pretty good. Could have done a lot of events. Maybe could have been decathlete, but, just couldn't get his act together. So, I don't have time. I got other recruits. I got other kids on the team. These two coaches, they never stopped believing in you. And it sounds like, thank goodness, you also never stopped believing in yourself. You maybe have said doubts, but you never said, hey, the story's not over. I'm continuing on. What an amazing testament to the power of coaches on young people.
Well, it absolutely was. And it touches me today. And that, Larry Hunt, just kept believing in me. And Mike Keller, you talk about 3 strikes. It's like, no, he didn't give me 3, he didn't give me 3 chances. I mean, he gave me 8, 9, 10.
Right.
Chances.
Yeah. A decathlon's worth of chances.
He absolutely did. But even, even beyond that, Coach Keller drove me, himself. I literally had a duffel bag and a garbage sack full of stuff. And he dropped me off at the coach's office in Spokane Community College in little Dwayne Hartman. I don't know if you know Dwayne, but
Mm.
Little distance coach, 5'7", he's such a distance guru. He probably got married in his running shoes. But Dwayne Hartman just opened up his door and said, "Come in, we're going to take care of you." And a day later, I had a job in the cafeteria, and I was attending classes, all the classes I needed to bring my grades up in at the junior college.
Wow.
And I, couldn't run track for a few weeks, and I used to go out and watch. And then when it was my turn, he was just like, "Suit up, let's go." And it was a great opportunity for me to get a third or fourth chance because, I'm at a junior college. I'm older than a lot of the kids at that school. But I gave Coach Hartman everything I had. I did the decathlon one weekend, came back, a week later and did 7 events at their conference meet. And I'll never forget, the headline read, O'Brien Community College, wins the conference title. And I think I got second at 2 events, and I won 5 of them at that conference. But, again, it's one of those things, thank God for Coach Hartman. Thank God for Coach Keller. And I remember while I was at Spokane, the University of Washington coach would come down and see me run. And Washington State University, Coach Chaplin came over and hey, you want a full scholarship? You come to Washington State. And I never even thought about it. I said, I'm going back to Idaho. For my last year of eligibility, I'm going back to Idaho.
Oh, wow.
And that's how strongly I felt, and was thankful that Coach Keller had done what he did for me. And I thought I owed it to him to go back to the University of Idaho and compete at least one season.
Wow, Dan. I mean, that I don't know if that floors me, but I mean, the what's the word I'm looking for here? Dang it. The not dedication, but the, loyalty. Yes. Thank you. The loyalty back to Mike and the crew that helped you to start out. That's quite amazing. And honestly, keeping it on the coaching side, that Mike would take you back. I mean, honestly, he worked hard. He's like, okay, you know what, Dan, maybe you just need to go somewhere, do Spokane, go somewhere else. You'll be fine. Mike was ready to bring you back. Oh man, that's so cool.
And so, I go back to University of Idaho, and it was, and Coach Keller, I think at this point was, I was like a nephew to him. He went out of his way to see where I was living and who I was living with. And, I had a kid who was a manager on the track team. I took a couple classes with him. I met with him a few times a week, and we, studied together, and everything really changed. My commitment level was really high. And a lot of people kind of ask me, it's like, by the time you got out of college, weren't you burnt out? It's like, no, by the time I got out of college, I was ready to go, because I hadn't put in all that mileage. I think about a guy like Dave Johnson, or, as somebody who just did all that work in college. And so I was chomping at the bit. And so that year, I went to the NCAA Indoor Championships, and I ran the fastest time in the 60 hurdles in the prelims. And then I crashed in the finals. Earl Diamond won the NCAA title, but I had run really fast against Robert Redding and Eric Cannon and those guys. But Cannon from Pitt went down, took me with him. So, and then I remember long jumping. Carl Lewis was coaching Leroy Burrell, and I thought, man, I'm gonna jump 26. I'm gonna jump 27 feet today, and I think I jumped 25.11, and I didn't make the finals. It was like you jump at Joe Green and Leroy, and it was just like, oh my gosh, look at these guys at the NCAA Indoor Championships. I mean, at 25.11, I was like 11th place. And so I had a good first year. And then outdoors, I had the #1 score in the country. And so Coach Keller took me to San Francisco State. I scored just under 8,000 points. And so I was the #1 decathlete in the country. And then I hurt myself at the conference meet, and I didn't get to compete at the NCAA Championships. And so Derek Huff from Arizona can thank me for not showing up at the NCAA Championships.
Dan, it's quite amazing knowing where the career ends up. We talk about the coaches that didn't give up on you, and thank God for them and their belief and love of you to continue in that. This is also a story of yourself not giving up on yourself. The injuries, the crashing in the final. I mean, if we were to ask most probably track people, and of course definitely non-track people, and say, hey, here's this guy, he wins the Olympic gold medalist, gold medal, does this, scores this many points, blah, blah. How do you think his college career went? And they're like, oh, the guy was, he probably, oh, and by the way, he went to University of Idaho. Oh, the guy was, he won everything, every title, easily. And it's like, oh yeah, barely won a title. Didn't win I'm sure you won a conference, we won several conference titles, but no national title. And that's quite amazing, where you could have been like, this has been great. I'm just going to go into the quote unquote real world, use this degree that I've been busting my hump to get, by the way. Great for athletics. That's awesome. But it wasn't meant for me. I'm going to go somewhere else. And you just kept at it.
Well, what's interesting about that is I remember a couple of moments when I wasn't in school and I wasn't running track and field. And I had this job at this cabinet shop, and literally, I mean, my mom did a lot of woodworking when I was growing up, and I took shop in high school. And so I knew how to use tools and things like that. But there was, I think that job ran out. I had to find a new one. I was slated to, wash dishes at a restaurant, at a hotel. And I remember the day I was supposed to show up, my first day, I couldn't do it. I couldn't go and do it because I just felt that I was meant for something else. And it was just one of those moments where I just said, this isn't for me. And it was 2 weeks later, I was in the car, I was headed to Spokane Community College, but it was like that. And I wonder if I take that job and I start making some money and paying my bills and settle in, what happens to me? And I just took a chance and ended up at Spokane. But, what was interesting as well is, Coach Keller just kept telling me, you're a decathlete. And I was just like, all I need to do is run faster in the hurdles. All I need to do is long jump a little bit farther, and I don't have to do the decathlon. But in 1988, when I was at Spokane Community, I went to a last chance qualifier in Santa Barbara at Santa Barbara City College. And I scored, I think, 7,400 points. And I qualified for the Olympic trials in Indianapolis in 88. And so I had a little twinge in my hamstring that outdoor season, but I went to the Olympic trials without really an idea that, hey, you're going to make an Olympic team. I wanted to go compete against Dave Johnson and Tim Bright and Gary Kinder and those guys. But when I was at that meet, I'll never forget what I saw. FloJo broke the world record in the 100.
Oh, it's 88. Yes.
And then Carl Lewis, I'll never forget, in a torrential downpour, takes one jump in the long jump. It's like 28:10, and they close the pit. And it was the most fantastic thing I ever saw. And so I get out there, I win the 100 in the decathlon, and it was just pouring rain, pouring buckets. And we had to, we were in the indoor facility in Indianapolis. Then we came out, and it was like 2 inches of standing water on the track. It's like I couldn't believe we were competing. But on that trip, I met Jackie Joyner-Kersee for the first time. I'm on the practice track, and Coach Keller, says, hey, that's Jackie Joyner. Let's go say hi. And so I went over and said hi to Jackie and Bob. And Jackie was just like, oh, what do you do? And I said, well, I qualified for the decathlon. However, I think I'm going to probably shift out of the decathlon, do the long jump, do the hurdles. And in a 20-minute conversation with Jackie and Bob, they convinced me to stay in the decathlon.
Wow.
You could be great in this event. Don't try to get out of it. Embrace it. You could be the next Bruce Jenner. And, I competed. I dropped out after the long jump because my hamstring was acting up. But I remember being on a plane coming home thinking, okay, I'm done trying to get out of it. I'm a decathlete from this day forward. And what's interesting, 3 years later, I was a world champion.
Right.
3 years later. Yep.
Wow. What do you, side note, kind of on the athletic side, decathlete side, do most decathletes, do they all kind of, at least at some point in the beginning, try to talk themselves out of it? Like, hey, if I just a little faster in the hurdles, or, just a little bit better in the pole vault, I ain't got to do these 10 events. I can just focus on one or two in your case. Does all of them kind of go through that talk in their head?
I think certainly some of them do. I don't think Curtis Beach ever had that.
I don't know, but he could have been a little faster than 15.
Yeah. But one thing that a decathlete will tell you is that no matter how you got there, the decathlon picks the guy.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
The athlete doesn't always pick the decathlon. Okay. Yeah. And so no matter how hard you try to get out of it, no matter what you think your timeline's going to be, you're always drawn back to it. And it's usually guys who, have a little bit of trouble in their past, or, need a way to burn some energy. And Dave Johnson will tell you some crazy delinquent stories as well. So it's the decathlon picks the athlete.
Yeah, that was St. Fred Dixon. He'd tell me that, like, Mike, you would never guess who and how I was as a high schooler compared to what you know me as my score and whatnot. Yeah, it's quite amazing. So, today in 2023, it is super hard for lots of reasons, financial, etc., to go pro in the multis. You were doing this back in the 88 era. So how did you decide to keep going after Idaho, and did you stay with Mike, or how did that work out coaching wise?
Yeah. So after college, after my last year of eligibility, I still needed credits to graduate. And I think one of the greatest disappointments that I can say that, that I didn't stay with is I didn't continue my education and finish my degree. Okay. So finishing my, as I went into the 1989 year, 1990 season, I attended classes part-time, but once I got ranked, world ranked, US ranked, I just decided, you know what, I got to spend my time on the track. And still to this day, I haven't completed my degree, which is something that I've thought about. Certainly if I want a coaching position, a high level coaching position at a major university or something, that's something that I would certainly need. But I'm not proud to say that, but it's just a fact. And I think it's one of those things that if I look back, I think, well, I should have at least done that, right? From an educational standpoint, because that's the opportunity that was given me. But no, Coach Keller was my coach. I stayed in Idaho. Good. I picked up a couple of great part-time jobs. And so I would, the first year post-collegiate, I'd be at the golf course at 5 a.m. and I would work from 5 to 10 or 5 to 11. I'd pick up range balls and check people in. And then I'd go to another part-time job where I, painted apartments and cleaned apartments for a guy. I had a buddy who was a slumlord, and, athletes check out, or students check out, and I clean it up for him. And then in the afternoon, from 3 to 6 or 2 to 7 or whatever, I would train in the decathlon. And I was, at the time I was listed as just a volunteer assistant at the University of Idaho. And that's what I did for, a year and a half. Sometimes the jobs were better where I didn't need a couple part-time jobs. I got a full-time job. And that was one of the things. But here's one thing I did do. When I needed a job, when I needed some money, I went to the Elks Lodge. I went to the Rotary Club, and I stood up there at lunchtime and said, "Hi, my name's Dan O'Brien. I'm trying to go to the Olympics. I'm trying to be a professional track and field athlete. If you got a fence that needs to be painted or a lawn that needs to be mowed, I'm looking to support myself." And it really did a lot for me in the community. People knew who I was, and they kind of knew what my path was and my vision.
I like the example of humility, of not thinking, "Hey, I'm going to be an Olympian. Hey, I should have won 88 if it weren't for my hamstring. I should be given stuff." It seems very humbling of like, hey guys, here I am. I'm trying to make the Olympics. You need a fence painted. What do you need? I'll work for it. It doesn't matter. I love the humility there.
I grew up with doing a lot of hard work. That was one thing that in Klamath Falls, Oregon, I lived on 12 acres, and my parents, we had some livestock, and we had a lot of chores to do, a lot of weeds to pull, and a lot of wood to chop. And, I was no stranger to hard work. And so that was easy. I think it was great when I didn't have to work, and all I had to do was wake up, think about training, and get to the track on time. So, I continued to hang out in Idaho, and then my breakthrough year was 1990. There was a decathlon at Washington State University that the Cougars put on, and I went over there and scored 82 mid. So I, bumped my 79, 88 up my senior year of college. And so I started to get on people's radar. Coach Sloan, who was the field event coach at Washington State University, he took a look at me, and and at the same time that I was there, he got onto my radar as well. It's just because Coach Keller and I, we had all the running events locked down. We were doing a lot of training, and I was kind of piecemealing all the field events. We knew a guy, I'd work with the pole vault coach, and Tim Taylor in the throws would help me. And I became very proficient in some of that stuff, but we didn't have anybody to tie it together. We weren't 100% sure how to train for the decathlon. And so in that year, 1990, Coach Keller and I went over and talked to Rick Sloan. Well, John Chaplin suggested it. John Chaplin, Coach Chap, he's like, "Hey, you got to get with Sloan." He's the best field event. Yeah. Chaplin. So, and I got to thank him as well, because he was one of those guys early on in my development that kept telling me, you can do it. And people kind of know John Chaplin as a gruff, pushy guy, but you know what? I have nothing but, I've seen him react to some other people, but he's a guy who always took me aside and just gave me no BS and just said, hey, it's up to you. You can do it. You got great people around you. And, even Chaplin was one of those guys who just always wanted me to come back to Wazoo, come back to Idaho. They love you in Idaho, just go work for them. And so, he's somebody who I respect a lot. So, I asked Coach Sloan to work with me a little bit, and Sloan gave it to me straight. He's like, look, don't show up, say you're banged up. Don't show up, say you're tired, injured. He said, look, if you show up, I expect you to train. Bottom line. He's like, I'm going to train my athletes. You can join me. And, it was one of those things. It was just like, look, we start at 1:30. I expect you to be here at 1:00 warming up. And, I'd roll in at 1:15 or 1:20 and think I got away with a 10-minute warm up, and he knew better. He'd come out and there'd be 2 shot put, marks on the sand. And how long you been here? It's like, and he even tells stories how, I'd be in the middle of a high jump, practice, and somebody would drive by, somebody would ride by in a car and honk, and I'd stop and wave and, hey, how's it going? And he's like, hey, what are we doing? And so we added Coach Sloan to the team as our field event guy. And what's interesting is, just throughout the years, I lived in Moscow, Idaho. Pullman, the whole town's on a hill. So I wasn't thrilled about, having a 4-wheel up your hill to get to a house. But no, I just thought Moscow was a little bit prettier town. And so I lived in Moscow, Idaho, ran at the University of Idaho in the mornings. And then I did all my field events at Washington State in the afternoon. And what's interesting is, people think I'm from Idaho, and some people think I'm from Washington, but I have to remind everybody, no, I'm from Oregon. And when we added Coach Sloan, I just started getting better, progressing. He knew the decathlon. My pole vault, when I think my freshman year of college, my pole vault was, even my senior year of college, was like 12.6, 13 feet. And in 1991, Coach Sloan helped me go from a 13-foot pole vaulter to a 17-foot pole vaulter. And that's what a difference that he made.
I get to know Coach Sloan a little bit through Fred. And what a great, unique guy. And when you described the no BS, don't come tell me you're banged up. From what I know of Coach Sloan, I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of how he operated. He always ran, whether he was tired, hurt, sick. He was always going to get his run in. He was the no BS guy. I mean, that's a great way to describe him. How did it work with the 2 coaches? You got a coach at University of Idaho, a coach at Wazoo. Not a lot of times. Sometimes egos can get in the way. I don't know Mike, but I know Coach Sloan. I'm not gonna say Coach Sloan did not have any ego, because I don't think anybody has no ego. But were there ever times there were conflicts, and how did the coaches work that out with you, kind of in the center as the project, if you will?
Well, when I first got started and I was young and just getting into the decathlon and showed a lot of improvement early on, both coaches really stayed in their lanes. Okay. Coach Keller was the organizer. He was the guy who went out of his way to book flights and different things. But shortly after I went pro, Coach Keller retired. Okay. And so he was no longer an official, the official head coach at the University of Idaho, but he was my head coach, my running coach, and he would do a lot of the organizational part of it, operations. And then Coach Keller just would hand me over to Coach Sloan in the afternoon and say, he's yours. And I would do all my field events and most of my lifting over there. And slowly over time, I spent more and more time at Washington State. And what I loved about Washington State was you could see it was a step up in facilities, a step up in expectation, a step up in coaching. And it was a Pac-10 school, it's a Pac-12 school now, and I liked feeling like that. All of a sudden now I'm in I'm in a weight room with Ryan Leaf. I was in a weight room with Drew Bledsoe and guys like Mark Versagen, and it's just like, okay, it's serious over here, and what we're doing here. And I by no means was ever in a situation like Ashton Eaton was, where I was a professional with a professional coach that was dedicated to me. I was always kind of in and around the collegiate system. And so it was Coach Sloan's collegiate system. It was only after school got out and the NCAA championships were over that he would then dedicate his practices to me. But I always worked into the Washington State practice system, the University of Idaho practice system.
How did you, as you continued to move from 82, which that's first time, anytime you break your first 8,000, that's a big deal for a decathlete. Nowadays, you got to kind of go 8250 and higher to start. Okay, you're in conversations of making teams and maybe doing something at that championship. As you started moving from 8,200 plus, and you have these two coaches, how were you as the athlete? And what I mean by that, Dan, is, sometimes as athletes in the decathlon, it makes it like a 10 times worse thing because there's 10 different events for you to do this. You start seeing, well, that person, that hurdler, I want to run 13 flat. Well, they're running 13 flat and they're doing this, coach. Why aren't we doing this? Hey, I know I'm not the greatest shot putter, but that shot putter's throwing 70. Why aren't we doing that kind of stuff? So maybe I can throw 50 plus or whatever. How are you as the athlete in regards to complete trust of the coaches or any ego of like, hey, coach, we need to look at something else. We need to do this, do that.
Well, what's interesting, living in the Palouse, between Pullman and Moscow, it kind of kept me away from, trouble in LA. I don't know if I would have managed well in Atlanta or, Los Angeles for that matter, but I wasn't on the track with hundreds of people that could have influenced the way that I thought or approached the decathlon. We were doing it Coach Sloan's way. Okay. We were doing it Coach Keller's way. And, Coach Keller coached all the athletes at Idaho. And it was like, look, this is our quarter mile training. And I bought into it. And I think that's one of the most important things an athlete can do is just buy into the system.
Yeah.
All right. I can't tell you how many guys, come to college, still consult with their high school coach because they're not pole vault, they're not jumping as high. They're not high jumping as high. And it's like, hey, look over here. Buy into this system. And I learned that early on because I remember when I was at the University of Idaho, I high jumped 6'11", and my technique wasn't great. But then when I started working with Coach Sloan at Washington State, I wasn't jumping as high and I got worried. And it was like, wait a minute, what's going on? And he said, trust me, you got to trust me. And literally 2 years later, I was jumping 7'2". All right. And it was just like, look, buy into the system, make the changes you need. Sometimes the process is one step back, two forward, one step back, two forward. You're going to get there eventually. But, the athlete skills go beyond just, learning how to jump. Learn how to get coached as well. And I think, of a lot of people that I've seen, I was a super, super coachable person. And I trusted these two guys to get me there. It wasn't until I got a little bit older. And actually the failure in 1992 got me to change a little bit and to take more ownership of the process. But up until that point, I was a great soldier. You tell me to do it, man, and I'm going to do it.
I love hearing that because, a lot of times from outside looking in, we see great athletes such as yourself and we think, oh, a little bit of prima donna, you got to kind of kid glove coach them. What do you want to do today? But I agree with you 100% because I think the super successes that we've seen. And when I say that, I don't mean necessarily gold medals. I mean, the kid who goes from 11,200 to a 10,600 in high school. That's super success. You've done an amazing job, coach. Those things happen when the kid is coachable, when they buy into the system. You believe in the system is more important than what the system is. And the system is important, trust me, but buying into it will get you leaps and bounds farther than trying to fight it or have all these outside influences pulling at you in different directions.
Absolutely. And what's fun about the decathlon for me is it's your system versus my system. Okay. And it's, this is the way we lift weights. This is the way we train, and everybody does it a little bit differently. And what's, and the proof is the end result, right? And so when you break a world record, when you win a US championship, you can say, look, my system's better than anybody else's. I used to be scared to death that Coach Sloan was going to allow somebody else to come into this camp and get coached. I mean, I look at a guy like Sheldon Blockberger or, Drew Fucci was one of the only athletes I ever had come train with me in Pullman, Washington. And it was and Drew would walk away from there and just go, oh my gosh, I learned more in a weekend than I have in months, just because he's hearing it from somebody else. But I knew at the time, especially with Coach Sloan, I think still to this day, he's one of the finest multi-event coaches in the world. All right. And I just say that without, any reservation whatsoever. He did the decathlon.
Mhm.
He knows how to train for it, but he also has all this extensive knowledge. He can coach any event.
Yeah, I'm afraid to your point, he doesn't get the due he deserves, the credit he deserves. You're right. I agree with that from learning a little bit more about him through Fred. So what other coaches did you work with for any extended period of time through the rest of your career?
So what was fun for me was to, work with, I would travel with Washington State University as a volunteer assistant coach, and we'd go down to UCLA for the Pac-10 championships or, an invitational. I would just sit and watch Art Venegas. All right. Just loved Art, but I would watch him work with Dave Dumble and John Godina, and just, and then Coach Sloan, hey, can Dan get in the discus session? And I'd get in there, and Art would just go, hey, you handle it pretty well. And he'd give me some tips here and there. But what was great about my coaches is I would come back with stuff and say, hey, look, Tony Campbell was doing this with his blocks in the start of the hurdles. Why shouldn't we? And Coach Sloan would say, all right, we'll try it. If it works, we'll use it. All right. Explain to me why you think it would work. We'll give it a go. But if it doesn't, I don't want to hear another thing about it. It's just like, okay. So my coaches were, I would, and that's the thing. Every time I came back from the Modesto relays, every time I came back from the Mount Sac relays, I had an idea on a technique or something. But I just, I think one of the things that, as well as we talk about coaches, it goes back to being in the system. There were things that I brought into the system that we used. And so I trusted that system when it came to, bringing techniques back in. But something amazing happened in the early 90s to the decathlon, and that was the Visa decathlon program.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. And so at that point, it was the US's bid to get back the Olympic gold medal in the decathlon. So Fred Samara at Princeton and Harry Mara at San Francisco State, these two guys, former decathletes, both of them just loved the decathlon. We hadn't had an Olympic champion since 76, Bruce Jenner. And they said, we got such a great history in the decathlon, and they tried to find a corporate sponsor, and they went all over the place. And finally they met a guy by the name of John Bennett at Visa, and John Bennett, senior vice president of marketing at the time, he fell in love with the decathlon, and the Visa decathlon program was created. And what that program was sponsorship and funding for the top 10 decathletes in the country. And then they put on 2 large clinics every year, one in the fall and one in the spring. And the one in the spring was usually at the same location that the US championships were going to be held, or the Olympic trials. And so we got a chance to see the facility, practice on it, go back and forth to the hotel and just kind of see everything. We had, of course, in 1996, we had a couple of clinics. We had both of our clinics in Atlanta, just because that's where the Olympics were. But that changed everything for not only me, but for a lot of decathletes. The Visa Decathlon program existed from 1990 to 1997, 98, and then it phased out. But during that time, Americans had never scored higher as a group, from places 1 through 5, 1 through 6, 1 through 7. You look at the Olympic trial scores in 1992. You look at the Olympic trial scores in 1996. You don't make an Olympic team in 1996 unless you score 8,600 points. You don't qualify for we had 46 guys at the Olympic trials in 1992.
Wow.
And now it's like you get 18, you get 20, maybe, it's like, where is everybody? This program was designed though to keep guys in the sport, guys who would be aging out. It's just like, man, if I get in the top 10, I'll get some funding. I'll go to these camps and clinics. But these camps and clinics were designed to share ideas. So I would show up with both my coaches. Dave Johnson would show up with Terry Franson and Kevin Reed and Mike Barnett. Ed Miller would be there. And we would have these day-long training sessions where you had to spend time with other coaches. I learned more in an afternoon with Mike Maynard than I did in an entire year in the discus. Mike Maynard taught me how to come out of the back in the discus. And my coach probably told me how and was helping me get there. But his explanation of it, his understanding of it, really helped me come to terms with what I needed to do and make that move. And so it was all of these coaches sharing ideas with these young decathletes. And everybody would walk away from those clinics and just go, oh my gosh, we're getting so much out of it. And so they would continue. But they would also bring in highly inspirational people. we got to meet Bob Mathias, Rayford Johnson, Milt Campbell, Bill Toomey, and of course, Bruce Jenner. And I remember the very first decathlon clinic that I went to was in San Francisco. You know, we stayed at San Francisco Marriott, and we had a morning called the Gold Medal Forum where we were going to get to hear everybody's story, all those gold medalists, the existing gold medalists. And, you know, I am coming down the elevator thinking, man, I'm meeting gods of the sport here. I mean, Rayford Johnson, there's a star constellation, you know, in the sky for this guy, right? And so I remember I went into the conference room and I was disappointed because they were just men. You know, Bob Mathias was old and Milt Campbell was overweight, and, you know, Bruce Jenner didn't look the same as when he competed. And I thought, wow, they're just men. But then I listened to them and it was like, oh my gosh, every one of them had such an amazing story. But what you realize is they thought differently. They thought differently than their competitors. They thought differently than the guys in the competition. I mean, Bill Toomey's story is absolutely amazing. So, you know, Milt Campbell, everybody got to tell their story and speak. And Milt Campbell was second up after Bob Mathias, and he told his story. And Milt was so committed to winning the Olympic gold medal that he told his mom, I'm coming home with the gold, or I'm coming home in a box. Meaning he was willing to die for that gold medal. He had to take a boat to Melbourne, Australia. He didn't fly. It was a 3-week boat ride.
Wow.
So Milt was speaking, and this out of nowhere, he pointed at me and said, Dan O'Brien, stand up. And I had shaken Milt's hand for 10 seconds before the meeting. And in front of my peers, and I'm in front of, Chris wasn't part of the group at that time, but I'm in front of, you know, Dave Maskey and Dave Johnson and Gary Kinder and Jay Thorson and, you know, all these guys from the 80s. And he says, what do you want to be, son? And I just, I want to be a great athlete, just like you. And he said, you should already quit. You're an All-American in college. You won high school state championships. You're a great athlete. You're here because you're a great athlete. What is the one thing that you want? And nobody'd ever asked me that tough question. Wow. Nobody'd asked me that question. And I said, it was my moment. And I didn't think about it. All I wanted to do was make money in the sport. All I wanted to do is, you know, do the best I could. But at that moment, everything changed. It was like, I want to be the Olympic gold medalist. I want to stand on the podium at the Olympic Games. I want to be called the world's greatest athlete, just like you guys. And Milt just said, write it down. Look at it every day. Know what it is you're trying to accomplish. And so, you know, after Milt came Rayford Johnson, Bill Toomey, and Bruce Jenner. And honestly, I don't even remember what anybody else even said. Wow. My life changed. My path became clear at that particular moment. And so the meeting got over. I went up to my room and I wrote on a piece of paper, I'll be the greatest decathlete ever. And on the other side, I wrote 9,000 points. And I carried that with me everywhere I went. And I got to know Milt very well. And Milt would, you know, we would talk on the phone. He said, I want you to stand in front of the mirror. I want you to tell yourself you're a world champion. And I hadn't won a U.S. championship at the time.
Right.
I want you to tell yourself you're the Olympic gold medalist. And I did it. I tried. It feels silly at first. But then my coach, Rick Sloan, would ask me about once a month, are you the world champion? And so this is the 1991 season. We got a world championship later in the year. And coach would ask me in March, are you the world champion? Today, are you the world champion? I was like, maybe. You know, and then he'd ask me again in May, are you the world champion? And by the time we got to July, he asked me, are you the world champion? And I looked at him and said, yeah, today I am the world champion. I will be the world champion. And August came and I got it done in Tokyo, and that was my first world title. But it was just meeting those guys in this program changed absolutely everything for me.
I'm so glad. And there was no way we were going to talk decathlon without Harry Mara coming into the conversation. Yes. Harry was one of the original, I call him the OGs of the podcast. I think he might've been episode 13 and 14. He actually, and you know Harry well, and I've gotten to know him and I love him to death. I consider him a good friend. When I approached him about being on the podcast, I was like, hey, but Harry, I'm going to have just a big, hairy, audacious goal here, by the way. I was like, I don't want you to just come in and talk about, you know, one time do your story. We actually did 3 episodes with him. So okay. we did his original all the way up. So his journey all the way up until Oregon. And then we did the Oregon, Bree and Ashton. You know, that was a pretty special time for the decathlon. And then we did his coaching philosophy, the 3 Ps on a third one. But he mentioned John Bennett. When you said that name, I was like, oh yeah, I know that name. And that Visa program and Fred Samara, and just he mentioned you, and just, you know, not only great group of athletes and people and coaches, but just kind of that amalgamation of all together really really changed the decathlon for the better at that point. I mean, really, we had never seen in totality what had that came out of that, what occurred from that.
Well, and I got to, not just Harry being with Ashton, but before that in this decathlon program, I spent tons of time with Harry and Fred. And what you realize is, and Harry was one of those coaches that I always looked at. He's like, man, he never had a racehorse. He never had the thoroughbred that could get him to the finish line. He coached a lot of guys, and you look at a coach like that and think, well, maybe there's something lacking from a technical standpoint. But, Ashton shows up and it's like, oh, no, you got to have a thoroughbred to win a championship here. The guy's got to be able to get it done. But I can, just for instance, I spent one of the first international trips I took with Coach Harry Mera and Fred Samara is I went to the Spanish national championships in 1991 in Barcelona. And we did that. And we had 5 guys on the decathlon team. The decathletes competed against the Spanish decathletes in a team competition. But I went because I'd qualified for the world championships just to do individual events. And so I could run I could do the field events and run in the first round at their championships, but I couldn't run in the finals or the semis or the finals. But I got to spend, 1.5 weeks, 2 weeks with Harry and Fred. And at that competition, I remember, Harry's just vim and vigor. I threw 52 meters in the discus and Harry's just like, OB, you're ready. You're ready, OB.
That's it.
Watch out, Tokyo. And I remember, I vaulted 525 in the pole vault. And I come over to the stands and high five and Harry and Fred and Coach Sloan and Coach Keller. And I said, I think I can be an 18-footer. And Fred Samara sat me down and said, you probably could be, but I don't want you to try to become an 18-footer. I want you to jump 525 every time. And I was just like, huh. And I thought about that. It was just like, wait a minute. All right. And I never forgot that. I could have spent more time in the vault. I worked on my plant and he was just like, no, get good at this, right? You 520, 525. He said, that's phenomenal. The goal is to do that in every decathlon. Right? You might go 550 at some point, but we don't want to go back,
Right.
we don't want to be a 480, 490 guy. Now be this good all the time.
Right.
Never forgot about that. And Fred was one of those guys, I think, who gets a little bit overlooked because everybody remembers Bruce Jenner, but Fred was that other decathlete on that team. He and Fred and then Bruce. But Fred was a phenomenal athlete. Just think about the coaching career Fred has had, but I'll never forget Fred. Fred said, I know I did a good job when I can just go up in the stands and sit and watch. Because there's so much interaction between coach and athlete. And I think maybe too much at times. The coach is like, all right, we're going to move our foot length back one. We're going to move up a fist. And it's just like, there's going to be a moment when the athlete can't turn to the coach and say,
right,
what do I do? And I mean, I learned that, through, dragging my poles to the Modesto relays by myself for the first time and having to, vault with nobody catching my step. And, but Fred was one of those guys who that when he spoke, man, you listened. You absolutely listened. But thank God for those 2 guys. They did. That Visa program changed the decathlon.
That's awesome, man. I love it. Those are great times and really amazing people that continue to do it today. Harry still speaks and just finished a book of his own. And then Fred Samara is, in the Ivy League, the championship, the HEPS title goes through Princeton. You are going to have to beat Princeton if you want to win the Ivy League title. Where do we go from here, Dan? I want to make sure we spend time after the decathlon. Where so you do all this, you have all this success.
Reebok, Dan and Dave.
What is it? Yeah, Dan and Dave, of course. Well, I say everybody. Half our audience is like 25 years old. So I wonder how many. If you are listening, and we just said Dan and Dave, if you don't know what that is, you got to go. I won't say Google it, but go to YouTube and watch the videos. Again, this goes back to the action figure. These are just more things that we need to do for track and field. Man, it was phenomenal. It was quite phenomenal. I remember just being a little high schooler in Alabama and was just, every time I think I watched TV just to see those commercials. They were so fun. That was a good time for track and field for two little old decathletes, man.
Yeah, we got to experience it. For us that year, it was, here's what Michael Jordan felt like. Here's what Joe Montana felt like. We were front and center in the sports world, not just track and field world, but the sports world. And so, I have a very successful 1991. I'm a Reebok athlete. They signed me at the beginning, and it was kind of a great and a sad day. I made some money, and I was able to train full time, but I had to give up my job at the golf course, So when I got that sponsorship, but year 2 for me rolls around, 1992. I'm coming off a world championship. I'm the favorite to win the gold medal. And Dave Johnson was the previous best American. He placed high at the Goodwill Games. He won the Goodwill Games in 1990. And so, an ad agency said, hey, we got the 2 best guys. And so this was a really interesting campaign. They took 2 unknown guys in an unknown event, and Reebok was trying to get into the running shoe industry.
Mm-hmm.
They hadn't had a presence in that industry, and it was a risk for them. So they allotted the majority of their marketing dollars, their sponsorship marketing dollars that year, to this Dan and Dave campaign. And, they called me up and said, hey, there were Reebok stores all over the country. Hey, we got our sales and, operations meetings in Orlando, Florida. Would you please join us? It's like, yeah, I'm a Reebok athlete. And at those, I meet Dominique Wilkins and Rahib Ishmael and, some of the Reebok athletes. And then I got a meeting. Dave and I have a meeting. Dave's a Reebok athlete as well. They have a meeting, and they sit us down and they said, this is what we want to do. Dan versus Dave. Who's the world's greatest athlete? They explained it all to us. It's a series of commercials. We're going to run them all year long. And they said, well, what do you guys think? You think you'd be up for that? And we're just like, yeah, I think we would be. They knew we would say yes, because directly after that, we marched down to a ballroom, and there were 1,000 people in a ballroom, and they put up on the screen, here's what's coming in 1992. And it was Step Reebok. And then there was that Reebok commercial where the guy was like he had like a snowboard on, but he was flying through the air with a parachute. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. French guy did this whole ballet thing in the air, and Dan and Dave, and they marched us up. This throngs of people, Reebok people. Dan and Dave, who are you guys? And so, shortly after that, I went to Los Angeles. Dave lived in LA, but I went to LA, and we did like 2 weeks of filming commercials. And, it was interesting. You think it's glamorous. I'm going to Hollywood. I'm going to film some commercials. It's 5 a.m. call times. They take us to Laker games, and, you'd be sitting courtside until, 11 o'clock, and then you'd go out, and then, your car's here. It's 5:15 a.m. And it's like, oh my gosh. So maybe show business isn't so fun. But we did those ads. And then Super Bowl in 1992, Super Bowl Sunday, those ads premiered.
Yeah, that's right.
And everything changed. I was a decathlete in a small town. Now, Dan and Dave are, two commercial TV stars. Mm-hmm. Everybody knew us. We went, whether it was Mount Sac or Modesto or Seattle, track meets I went to. Now twice as many people would show up. I had to have security to get around, the Modesto relays that year. Just weird.
Wow.
And there were some ideas, I'd be sitting eating snacks, waiting to film a commercial. And I'd look at Dave and just think, we got to get to the track, brother.
Yeah, right.
I'm missing my 400-meter training here. And, but my coaches were conscious of that. I always was doing, workouts. And then when I was home, it was serious, serious training. So, Dan and Dave, everybody kind of looks at it, and, it takes us all the way to the Olympic trials. And it was a roller coaster year that ended very strangely. But it changed my life. So, I don't know why or who set it up, and you got to blame probably Duffy Mahoney, but the Olympic trials were in New Orleans.
That's right.
In July.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, man.
That's perfect time.
So we had our Visa clinic earlier in the spring on that same track. And I'll never forget. It's an afternoon session. And Visa lady comes up to me and says, hey, there's a group of school kids coming in. Bruce is going to talk to the kids. Would you mind joining him? And I was like, oh, no, not at all. So I do that. Go over and talk to the kids. Well, during that time, everybody was pole vaulting. All right. And so I missed the pole vault practice. I'm talking to kids. And so I'm at the Olympic trials, a few months later. I had like a stress fracture in my lower shin, and had to wear an air cast, but I was getting my training in. I wasn't in the best shape of my life, but I was finally healthy. I didn't get as many competitions in, but I get to the Olympic trials, and, I'm on world record pace after day one. What was interesting though is nobody comes and watches the first event of the decathlon, right? It's family, friends, people who want to get up that early. Well, Dave and I show up at the track at 9:30 and there are thousands of people in the stands and they're all wearing white t-shirts with a Dan or a Dave on the front.
Right.
Dave was a blue box. Dan was a red box. And it was like Reebok dropped them out of a helicopter or something. They handed them out to every person that went in. All of a sudden now we got thousands of people sitting there watching the 100 meters in the decathlon at 9:30, 10 o'clock in the morning.
Wow.
Yep. So I get through day one and I'm feeling pretty good. And then the second day I run pretty conservatively in the hurdles. I don't throw the discus as far as I would like, but then we settle in for what is, the 4-hour pole vault session, especially guys. We got 2 pits going. We got 20 guys on each pit. And, I take on my warm-up runs and jumps and sit and wait. The bar goes up. It's at 430 and 440 and 450. And my standard height was 480. That's what I did in practice. That's what I did in all the meets leading up. And I never had any problems with it. And so I just, I think what got me a little bit was the heat. And so I'd come down the runway in my first attempt and just like way under, and I come straight down on the pole or the bar, and I'm not even close. And it's just like, all right, the learning experience, because you're in 100-degree temperatures, you think you're warm, but you're not.
Right.
You got to keep moving. You got to keep running, stay loose. And that was kind of the misconception. So on my second attempt, I was over and I don't even know what touched it. My jersey just barely brushed it and it came down. And so all of a sudden, before I know it, I'm on a third attempt at the Olympic trials in the pole vault.
Well, was that foreign to you? So I worked with another decathlete that well, Mr. Trey Hardy, and Trey, when we were together at Mississippi State, he made it I don't know. I just think it was a fun game for him. He liked to go third attempt on the first bar every time. We'd be at Texas Relays every time. Like, you're killing me here, man. But was that a new thing for you to be in that situation, or had occurred before?
I can't remember up until that point being on a third attempt at an opening bar. Especially in a decathlon. So much of the emphasis in the decathlon is get safe jump, safe throw, get on the board.
Get on the board.
But all of a sudden now, and to top it all off, all this Dan and Dave hype. There's more people at the stadium and there's a camera in your face. And, I hadn't really experienced that too much.
Sure.
But, I'm the kind of guy who I have a good time out there. Okay. And in the pole vault as well is you need the competition to give you a little extra courage. You need the competition to give you just to help you let yourself go a little bit, because it's a dangerous event. All right. And so you're a little bit of a daredevil. But I remember just being extremely just scared. It's like, oh my gosh. And I never was really scared up until that point. And I was getting ready for my third attempt. I start my run and I feel like I rushed my first couple steps, and I was like, whoa, calm down. And I'm telling myself to calm down. And no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't take my mind back to Pullman, Washington on a nice sunny day, just Coach and I. It was just, tunnel vision, run down the runway, and I run down the runway and I plant the pole. And before I know it, I've straddled the pole and I don't have a chance to make the bar. And I come down and I'm just in disbelief. It's like, what on earth happened? No idea. It just happened in a flash. Third attempt, gone, done. Dave's hugging me. I just, I pick up my gear. I kind of make my way to the practice track. I got cameras all over me, and I get over to the practice track, and still it's just like, I got to get away from everybody. And I got a massage therapist who had access to the practice track, and he and I just walked a couple laps on the track, and it was just like, I was trying to unravel what on earth just happened. And, people, are you not going to make the Olympic team? Oh, come on, man. They're going to give you a chance to make the Olympic team. It's like, no, man, it's done. So, coaches came and got me, and it was, but it was just every devastation. Oh my gosh, it's like somebody died. And so my coaches got me up into the sky boxes where Visa was. My parents were sitting up there, and, saw mom, dad, had a good cry. And my coaches sat down and said, hey, here's what we're going to do. And I was just like, we're done here. Let's just, let's just watch the rest. And he's like, no, We're going to go out. We're going to throw the javelin. We're going to run the 1500. We're going to congratulate those guys that make that team. And I was just like, oh, brother, really? And my coach is like, absolutely. This is what we're doing. And so it was like, okay, you know what? Let's stick to the routine. And so the pole vault got over with. I went to the practice track and I got ready to throw the javelin. Had a personal best in the javelin, and I probably ran the easiest 4:33 in the 1500 ever. Meet got over. They announced the winners. I do all the interviews that I need to with, NBC and everything. And had it not been for my coaches, I don't go back out there.
Mm.
I don't go out and finish the decathlon. I don't go out and, concentrate. But I do remember being in the javelin and having the weight of the world off my shoulders.
Mm.
I was no pressure. And it made me realize this is why I do the sport, because I love it. It's fun. I enjoy it. But if it's not for my coaches to take that moment and say, no, you don't get to decide. This is what we're doing. That changed a lot of stuff for me. My perception of them and it was just like, thank you. Thank you for forcing me back out there.
I have a lot of respect for that, Dan, and for you and the situation you're in. It's easy for us to be watching TV and watching a football game, baseball, basketball, track, and a great athlete makes a mistake. And it's easy for us to say, oh, they choked. Oh, I can't believe they would do it. What a bum. You would never do that in this situation. First of all, you don't know the stress and pressures and all the outside things that are going on. But, we're all human, right? Like we all make mistakes. I make mistakes. I'm just very thankful that a camera is not in my face when I make my mistake and that everybody's like, oh, Mike, you blew this, it's like, man, thank goodness I get to kind of live in my own little bubble for that, to be able to do that in front of, when you talk about the biggest of audiences, everybody was watching, and to come back again, I see this theme of humility and coaching speaking into you of, all right, well, yeah, I understand, but we're going to go do the javelin. We're going to do the 15. We're going to do that. We're going to go and congratulate. Like, I love that line. And I could see from what I know of Coach Sloan, this being Coach Sloan of, hey, we're going to go out and congratulate those guys. Congrats again. And let's move on. And it's never going to happen again. Let me tell you that.
So Eric Long, you're welcome.
Yeah, a lot of people owe you thanks, man.
No, but what was interesting about that as well is I get back to my hotel room. First person that called me, Jackie Jonah Kersey.
Oh, wow.
Jackie and Bob. I don't know how they got where they knew where I was staying, but I get a call and Bob Kersey's on the phone and he said, Dan, this, sports, it happens. Take your time, breathe, relax. Just, don't do anything rash. Okay. Just, don't do anything crazy. And I was like, hey, thank you very much. And then the next person that called me was NBC. Hey, you showed a lot of great sportsmanship. We'd love for you to come along to Barcelona and announce. And it was like, what is just, it just was one of those things that just, because I stuck around and did every
interesting.
Yeah. And so I, next thing I know, but I will tell you, it was heartbreaking.
Sure.
I used to have bad dreams. I used to dream that I got the call and it's like, hey, we need you. It's like, I'm on the Olympic team. But I was dating Tanya Hughes, the high jumper at the time from University of Arizona. She made the Olympic team and I went through processing with her. And so I got to see it all, but I got, the Visa Decathlon team was there for support. And people ask me, how were you able to get over it? I had the greatest support system in place. Maybe I didn't realize it at the time, but I had my two coaches and I had this town of Moscow, Idaho. And I'll never forget, I get off the plane coming home and there's 100 people there, and it was like, God, they did that for me.
Right.
And they helped me get over that. And I was at a golf tournament a week later and a little old lady came up to me and hugged me. And, she's like, we still love you. It's just like, well, yeah. So I had all the pieces in place to overcome that adversity, but we got to think back to the Visa clinic. I missed the pole vault day track. All right. So what we came to the conclusion of, my coach and I, that was the year that they extended the pits for safety reasons. Remember? They made the pits a little bit bigger. The fronts came out a little bit farther. My timing was off.
Yeah, that affects it.
I jumped too many times with the new pits. And all of a sudden I get to the Olympic trials. I got the extended fronts. My last stride is taking place almost inside the pit. My perception was just off, but I'd go back and think, if I pole vault that day at the Visa clinic,
right,
do I win an Olympic gold medal?
Yeah.
Do I make that team and win an Olympic gold medal? And it took me a long time to figure that out. It's like, why was I so off that day? And people talk about, you're going to have trouble when you experience things for the very first time in unknown places and for the very first time. And it's just like, that's why we always tried to go someplace, compete on that facility before we went to a championship.
Dan, this is hard to say to you, being who I am and who you are and what you've done. But it's interesting you said that, if I would have been able to pole vault that day during the camp, maybe I could have won the gold medal, et cetera. I truly believe that, and it's weird to say this because there's a lot of things that have to go in for you to believe this kind of saying here, but things happen for a reason.
Yeah.
And it's easy for us. We do it a lot. It's human nature to think back like, oh man, if I wouldn't have done this, I'd have gone on and become CEO. We also, I think, forget that if this would have happened, bad things could have been in the future too. Maybe you do vault at that camp and you understand the new pit selection and you go to the Olympic trials that year and you make the team and win the gold medal and then never make another Olympic team.
Sure.
That's a possibility. The possibility that you still don't make the team at the 92 Olympic trials is still there as well, So I know it's hard. And again, it's hard for me to say this to you, Dan, because you lived it. You lived the heartache and the crescendo on the mountain, my friend. But, I think things happen for a reason. I think you are who you are. I don't think this. I know you are who you are today because of who you were. The experiences that happened to you, you had to have those experiences to be who you are today. And it's really weird to say this. And I'm not sure anybody's ever told you this. Maybe they have. I'm glad they happened to you, because we get who we are today, 2023 Dan, who I love and adore, and thank God we have him, who you are today, based on the things that happened to you in the past, man.
That failure absolutely shaped me. If I look back on my career and see all the successes I had, you know what? I don't remember, falling back on those successes and having those successes really help me. Just a few of them maybe, but I look back on the failure and think about what a motivating factor that was and what I did and the changes I made and the athlete I became after that. And so, I talk about how that was so, how that changed everything for me from a coaching standpoint, my relationship with my coaches. Up until that point, I was the young, good athlete who did exactly what their coaches told him to. But after that moment, I made a point to take, I made it my personal responsibility to be responsible for my successes and failures. All right. And Coach Sloan even says, oh yeah, after 92, now we had a B plan, a C plan, a D plan, got a heavy wind. What am I going to do in a heavy wind? What am I going to do in a rain? What am I going to do on a hot day, cold day? I added a few more poles to my bag. And I was just more prepared, a much more prepared athlete. But I also, because of that, I matured a lot. I came through it, and I was just a tougher athlete. Absolutely. And so, even Harry and Ed Miller and guys like that go, oh no, because, they saw what happened in 92. And so when I showed up in 1993, 94 and 95, they're just like, oh, we're getting the angry Dan O'Brien here. He's not gonna lose. So yeah, that was such a learning experience for me. But again, it goes back to the coaches, and it's just like, I appreciate them for putting me in that position to have such a learning moment.
Right. Love it. Hey, for the sake of time, let's fast forward here. So we talked about the, I don't know. I kind of don't want to call it the big negativity of 92, but obviously what happened. You go into 96, that went well. You win the gold medal. You did exactly what you set out you were going to do. You hit the top of the mountain. What do you do? What does a guy like you do when it's all done? When you decided, I'm hanging up all 10 pairs of shoes. What do you go on to be? Talk to us about post athletics now.
So I think one of the saddest days for me was the day after I won the gold medal. Okay. I wake up, so I win the gold medal, and, Michael Johnson and I, we have the same agent. We do a big party at Planet Hollywood, and we're up till 4 a.m, and I go to bed, and I wake up, and there's the medal on the bedstand next to me. And I thought, oh man, I got the gold medal, but I was depressed because I wasn't different. I thought, I'm gonna win this gold medal, and I'm just gonna feel different. I'm putting everything into this, man. When this happens, my life's gonna just be perfect, right? The stars are gonna line up or whatever. But I didn't feel any different, and so it was a little bit of a letdown. And not only that, my goal was gone. thing that I woke up for every single day, the thing that got me out of bed, the thing that drove me, and the thing that I went to bed early for, and the thing I'd lay in bed at night and stare at the ceiling and think about. It was kind of done. And it's just like, oh, wow, what do you do now? And, I went to the Wheaties breakfast and, got to be introduced with, Bruce Jenner and Bob Mathias and those guys, and went on the lunch circuit, for about 6 months. But I didn't have a plan.
Mm.
And I think that was maybe my biggest mistake, is that I just didn't have a plan. What are you going to do afterwards? Bruce Jenner said he was lucky. He won the gold and he got to talk about it for the rest of his life.
Right.
Was that going to be me? Maybe. But if you think back on 76, how many Olympic athletes do we really revere and remember? And it's a handful, but here we are in the modern day, and it's just like, oh, we're a dozen stars that came out of the 96 Olympics, not just in track and field, but in other sports as well. And, but I still had a love for the sport of track and field, and I felt young enough. And again, I didn't have all that mileage on me in the early part of my career, that I thought I could compete again. But I got started with the 97 year too late. So I just wasn't able to go to the US championships. But that year, because I didn't go to the US championships, we pressed, my agent and I, along with the federation, pressed to get returning world champions an automatic bid into the world championships. And so that was the year that came about. I came back in 1998, had a nice full season. My coaches at that point, I think they had enough of each other. Everybody stayed in their lane long enough. And after the 96 games, Coach Keller was like, hey, just come train with me. And Coach Sloan said, nope, let's just come train with me. And so I had to make a decision, and I ended up just staying and training with Coach Sloan. Coach Keller was moving out of town. He wanted to get out of Moscow, Idaho, so I didn't travel with him. So, there were some changes, but I didn't have a plan. And I think the toughest thing for me to do was to be done being an athlete. I win the Goodwill Games in 98. And I think, well, you know what? I'm going to make another Olympic team in 2000, but I rupture my planner just weeks prior to the trials. And then I think, 2004, I'm going to be the oldest guy ever to make a track and field Olympic team, and just injuries, just weird stuff happened. And I moved down to Arizona in 2000. And I was training at Arizona State University with a handful of post-collegiate guys. And I just enjoyed, I wanted to get out of the cold weather. The cold weather was just beating me up in the Palouse, and I, met a girl. She didn't want to stay in Idaho. So it's like, we moved down to Arizona, and then I moved down to Arizona full time in 2002. But I always thought, like, when I was messing around in school and ineligible, I just thought, if I can put a good year together, I'll be able to get back out there and compete. And I tried for a long time. I just didn't want to give it up. I was the Brett Favre of track and field. It's just like, look, somebody's gonna have to drag me off that track. And it took a long time. I finished my book, and it got published in 2012. And honestly, until I wrote the final chapter of that book, I thought I was an athlete. I thought I was a track and field athlete that could still compete at a high level. But when I finished that book, it was very cathartic in the fact is now my athletic career is over. I can put track and field behind me. And there was a period in the 2000s that I, didn't go around the sport.
Yeah.
It made me sad. It's like, I'm not out there competing, and I just, what can I contribute? And then it was guys who I competed against and with that got me back out there. Steve Fritz at Kansas State, and Chris Huffins when he was at Cal. And I'm seeing all these guys coaching at high levels. And he was young guys, Jamie Cook, and guys who came to my high school championships, guys like that I thought, that's where I belong. And so I took a volunteer position at Arizona State University. They had a great decathlete. He was, second at the Pac-10s a couple of times. And then I got to work with Jackie Johnson, NCAA champion.
She was pretty good. Yeah.
Oh yeah. She's not bad. And she's got a great story too. She came to ASU on a basketball scholarship, ends up winning heptathlon four years in a row. Yeah. But one of the greatest thrills of my life was to help her make the 2008 Olympic team. And what's interesting is, she was different than I was. She ran track since she was 5 years old, club, everything. And so she did 1 year post-collegiate, and she said to me, she's like, I think I'm done. And I was like, what? You're the best heptathlete in the country. You got to beat, you got to beat Hylise, but Hylise is on her way out. You could be the next. And she's just like, nope, I think I've had enough. And it was just like, wow. And she went and worked for University of Phoenix and never looked back. And I really respected that about her. But somebody who I really respect as a post-collegiate athlete is Michael Johnson. He had a plan when he stepped away from the track, what exactly he was going to do. He did it with a purpose. He went to another Olympics because it set him up for his plan afterwards. And, he's a guy who's, he's a year younger than I am, but it's somebody I look at and think, what a great mentor, Michael has been just for, this is how you do it. You at a high level, you step away and you have a plan for it. And it took me a long time, and I've had to kind of rediscover myself dozens of times. But, the thing that keeps coming back to me is I love the sport of track and field. And I want to figure out, how do I make a difference? And recently I've been talking to Rich Benoit and John Godina. It's like, how do we put on more meets? How do we, how do we enhance the track and field experience? And so for me to get called up into the broadcast booth, I'm honored to talk about upcoming athletes in the collegiate ranks. And then, I get a chance to, announce the U.S. championships. I was at the World Championships last year on the mic. So it's, I'm there in the sport. And as much as I try to go off away from the sport and, find my pot of gold, it's just like, no, man, my pot of gold's in the sport, and going to the annual meeting and just sitting with people like yourself and, getting to talk to, Kevin Reed and, Glenn Sefcik and guys like that. It's just like, that's where my love is.
I'm curious, Dan, you mentioned the book, and if you're on YouTube, you can see the book. If you're not, you just Google, first of all, Google Dan O'Brien book. Actually, that's probably not a great thing to Google. There's probably 1,000 books with your name on it. But the name of the book is Clearing Hurdles, The Quest to be the World's Greatest Athlete. I'm curious, Dan, you mentioned, I'm probably paraphrasing here a little bit. You said, until I wrote the last chapter of this book, I still felt like I was an athlete. And it's hard for me to imagine, because I've never been an athlete anywhere close to what you were, and probably still are. How do you, as an athlete of that high, how do you prepare for that last race? Do you know it's your last competition? Do you call your coaches? Are you talking to your coaches like, hey man, let's this decathlon, or hey, I'm gonna do this hurdle race at this Milrose or whatever, but this is going to be it. I'm going to proverbial put my shoes down at the finish line when it's over and I'm done. How do you actually, it seems, hold on, I'm going to stumble over this here a little, Dan, stay with me though. So when Fred Dixon, when he was working to retire here, he was working and he was going to retire, it was extremely hard for him. And I can understand it, because it's not something, there's no class you take on how to retire. There's no lessons. There's plenty of articles and stuff, but until you are faced with, on Friday, it's going to be my last day of a job. He worked here for 20 something years. Friday's going to be my last day. Monday, I'm going to wake up and I'm not going to call my customer or answer email. I don't know what I'm going to do. I can only imagine it has to be similar on the athletic side of, hey, after this competition, win or lose, draw, false start, on Monday, I'm going to wake up and I'm not going to compete anymore. How do you do that? Who do you talk to? How do you process that to be ready, if you can even be ready for it?
I never put myself in that situation. I mean, even just thinking about it that way and talking about it, it saddens me. And I think, what could I have done that? And I just never did. Me retiring hit me in the face. I went to the 2002 U.S. championships at Cal. So they had the U.S. championships were at Stanford, but they had the multis at Cal. And so I said, you know what? 2001, sorry. So 2001, so it was a world championship year. Okay. And Brian Clay was competing, Tom Pappas, some of the young guys, Travis Geffert. And, I ran well in the 100 meters. And then in the long jump, I long jumped like 720. I'm a 25-foot long jumper or better. And I thought, look, on the day, I can step up and get it done. It just didn't come to me that day. It honestly didn't. My shot put was a struggle. And then, I didn't have a great training season. I competed here and there with Coach Sloan, and we traveled to some meets and stuff. But that hit me like just a ton of bricks. And you know what? I didn't finish that decathlon. And I walked away from there just thinking, golly, am I done? So it was a little depressing from that standpoint, but I kept, again, it's just like, no, man, I need more time. And, then there was some knee trouble and some hip trouble and, some different things like that. I just never put myself in the finality of doing that. And I probably should have, but I was also the kind of guy that I was a bad planner, then, and I'm kind of a bad planner now. It's just like, I'm going to wait to see the next good thing that comes along. And, if you don't plan, sometimes a good thing doesn't come along. I've been fortunate enough to fall into some things, but, I never had that plan. And I think not getting my degree and kind of having something to fall back on, was something that really hurt me. Even when I was a volunteer assistant at Arizona State University, a mentor who I have who has just been so good to me is Steve Miller. Okay. Former head of Nike running. Now he runs Andre Agassi and his foundation and everything is in Las Vegas. And Steve finally said one day, he said, look, if you're going to coach, get a job and coach. All right. Right now, you're just being a volunteer assistant. And I used to just come home from, the NCAA championships and just go, what a waste of time. I was a volunteer. Yeah, I helped the team, but, I wasn't getting paid for it. And you do it long enough and you start to resent it a little bit as a volunteer. And Steve's like, well, look, go into coaching and get a job or don't. And so I just told Coach Kraft, I said, look, this is my last season volunteering. And we had a cry and, we've been really good friends ever since. He's like, look, you need to go do your announcing. You need to go, if it's high level coaching someplace, if it's pursuing other opportunities. And so, somebody like Greg Kraft telling that to me, means a lot as well. It's like, God, a guy's been a fantastic coach for so many years. And, people had been telling me that for a while, but I remember when I had a chance in 2004, NBC calls and says, look, we want you to broadcast. And I said, all right, give me a contract. Yeah, we don't do that. You get paid per event. We want to try out this year. And I said, look, got to make it worth my while. Okay. Look, give me a contract. I'll step away from the sport. And they didn't. So I said, no, man, somebody wants to give me a gold medal. Somebody wants to pay me to go to the Olympics. And, I wanted to be back on top. And I should have stopped and said, no. Look, I got to start planning for my future. Take that job with NBC. Who knows? I might have still been with NBC, to this day. But that's a regret that kind of came and, went, but I didn't have the finality of it. And it was difficult, but I'll tell you what, it was really something difficult to write that book. But when I finished it, my wife even said, wow, you look relieved. It was a hard book. The last chapter was really, really hard. It talks about, where I am currently in my life at that time. And a good friend of mine, he and I wrote the book together and, we put it down and it was just like, geez, now I'm done pursuing the gold medal.
Is that kind of your catharticism of it all? Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So talk to us about the announcing. I thought it was interesting when you talked about in 92 when you didn't make the team and then NBC was like, well, we want you to come be behind the mic. I thought I was like, oh, wait a minute. See, look how that kind of set you up in the future as well. Dan, you might be, I have a lot of respect for the people that are behind the mic, the Dwight Stones, Carl's sister. Why is her name escaping me? Cheryl. She did it for a while. And, unequivocally 100% of the time you get bashed. You can't do it right. No announcer has ever gotten it right. I'm sorry. They just everybody's terrible, air quotes there. I've never seen that about you. And you do a fantastic job. I don't know why. Maybe it's the decathlon, so you quote unquote know every event, so you can speak into it. But as I got kind of behind the scenes a little bit, I got to learn what the on the field personalities are for these track meets and the announcers. And oh my goodness, trust me, if you think they're doing a bad job, you try it, because this is not easy to do on the fly with all these different events, all these different people, all the different background stories that you've got to be ready to go on the live broadcast faster than a snap of a finger, for crying out loud. Talk to us little bit about that process. Kind of give us a behind the curtain look at what goes on there.
So who makes me look good is Rich Benoit. So Rich sits to my right, and I'm at the NCAA championships. He writes on a piece of paper, men's long jump, hands it to me, first place, second place, third place, first video, second, third clip. And we go over it real quick. And he's like, this guy was last year's champion. This guy was third at the SEC meet. Boom, boom, boom. He sets all the stats up for me. And then he hands it to me. And then the video comes up. And I was like, in the men's long jump, boom. And it's just like, thank you, Rich. But you need people like that.
Yeah.
And it's Walt Murphy. It's, you know, it's just, there's so many people behind the scenes that are filming those individual efforts in the field events. And then even when it comes time to, Tom Lewis is a guy who gives me the races sheet by sheet. He 160 meter, 60 meter prelims, boom, boom, boom. I got all the lanes, what school everybody's from, and their best achievement of the year, or their fastest time of the year, or their best overall career achievement. You need people like that. And as an announcer, you can't do it all yourself.
Right.
There are meets where you have to do it yourself, but you can't do it for a big SEC or an NCAA meet or a US championship. You got to have people that do that. But this is crazy. I go to Barcelona in 1992 for the Olympic Games. My broadcast partners are Tom Hammond, of course, and OJ Simpson. Yeah. OJ Simpson.
What's that song? Memories. I've had a few.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a
Wow.
memory. Oh my
But they
goodness.
brought me in to do the decathlon, and controversy in the men's decathlon shot put. Dave Johnson had a third foul in the shot put. He protested for 20 minutes. They gave him a fourth throw, and he threw a personal best. And so we're going through it in the broadcast booth, and I said, Dave Johnson got really, really lucky on that one. It looks to me like that third one was a foul. His foot was up on the toe board. He's saying it was on the side, and we saw it 100 different ways, and he got it. He comes back and he wins the bronze medal. I get back to the hotel, and Dave's wife, Sherry,
I was saying, are you a hater? Yeah,
oh,
that's what I was thinking.
like,
yeah.
Why aren't you supporting Dave? And I was just like, oh my gosh, and we in the van for NBC, it's like, call it like you see it, and no small talk, be loud, say it like it is. And so you're right. Everybody's not going to be happy, right. But I think the greatest critique I ever got was the boys over at Let's Run. Dan O'Brien, at least they said in the distance running, at least Dan O'Brien knows what he doesn't know, and he doesn't go any farther. And it's just like, oh, that's pretty good, I guess, instead of being up there and talking about a bunch of stuff you don't know, And that's the thing. People tell me, it's like, look, we don't need all that talking in a distance race. Set it up and let us watch distance running. And that's what distance, and it's like, okay, you got it. You got it. Dwight and I kind of go through the distance races like that and just give the pertinent information. You know what? And when it comes to tech, when it comes to strategy and stuff, none of those coaches want to give you their strategies. I talk to coaches till I'm blue in the face, and those distance runners, Dan at Alabama is not going to tell me
right
how his 1500 meter runner is going to run that race, right. And so it's just like, well, in the last race he did this, and you just have to let those races go out. But I mean, I really enjoy the broadcasting, and what I think I like best about it is like a race. It's like you training, you have to be prepared when you show up, and if you're not, that comes through certainly as well. I enjoy international broadcasting a little bit more because it's a little bit more free form. You're on air for longer periods of time. You don't take as many commercials. And so you're having just these super long conversations. American television is very structured. Hey, we're going to come out of commercial, and we're going to show X, Y, and Z. And we're going to go to commercial. A lot of commercials in US broadcasting.
Well, you mentioned some names, and I want to mention just a couple more. You mentioned Rich Benoit. If you're listening now and you want to know who in the world is Rich Benoit, he actually was a guest about a month ago at this point. He is the owner of VS Athletics, so you got to go check him out. Two other people that I thought do a pretty good job too, and they're in your vein of the competitions. Trey does a pretty good job.
Yes.
Knowing where, Trey's from Alabama like me, so we can be excused to not know some things, but Trey does a phenomenal job. Senior Richards Ross is another person I thought who does a good job. Before we come off of the announcing, though, I do have to ask the question. It gets asked a lot. I don't know that anybody's ever given an answer. Why in the world do you go to an athlete almost as soon as their first foot comes across the finish line and start asking questions?
Well, that's a good question, but I think the answer is you've lost your moment. If you wait till the next commercial break and bring them back, it's really difficult. And this is something that they've tried to do as well. It's like, wait till they stop breathing, and then do the interview, and then put the recorded interview, back in and at a later recording. And so I think what's really happening now is to save money in broadcasting. everything's live to tape.
Mm.
Okay. It used to be, hey, we can do it all to tape and then they can edit it. And it just takes way too long. So they got to do it now. And honestly, it's like, as an athlete, you're huffing and puffing. There's no better time than getting that athlete's perspective right after this. And maybe we haven't learned our lesson from boxers, but track and field athletes know to expect it. But some of them are just like, look, Athene Mo, I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. And if you've just broken a record or you ran really well, you know what? If we got to go to a field event, if we got to go to a race and then come back to you afterwards, you're gonna get your.
Yeah. I just had to ask. There's been just some funny, like, man, this person can't talk. Rightfully so, they can't talk. Oh my goodness. Hey, Dan, so we're scheduled for just a few more minutes. If you're good, we can keep going. I'm good. I want to be respectful.
Let's keep trudging away. I'm digging this.
And we're kind of in the last stage here. Tell me, what are you doing today? Everybody wants to know, where in the world is Dan O'Brien? What are you working on today?
So of course you'll see me at a handful of track and field gigs on ESPN and doing work at the U.S. championships. I'm still doing great work with USA Track and Field, indoors and outdoors. Adam Schmenk's my guy over there. But
he's good.
So when I first moved to Arizona about 20 years ago, I met a gentleman who had a dream of building a large sports park. All right. He had 2 kids that played club sports and they were all over the valley, in the valley of Phoenix here. He had a son that played basketball. It was on one side of town, a son that played baseball, other side. Mom was taking the, club sports is just crazy, right?
Crazy.
So Chris Huffins even said, kudos to those club parents.
Amen.
But his dream was, why isn't everything just under one roof? And it's like, that's kind of interesting. Why the baseball facilities, there's basketball facilities, there's, we got football fields. Like, somebody needs to build a park that has it all. And so Disney World Wide World of Sports was built. And that idea of bringing all those club sports together was born, but nobody figured it out, how to do it as well as Disney. But here, Randy Miller is his name. He's the founder of Legacy Sports USA. I was training his 2 sons and he got me interested in the idea of this large sports park. And for years, he tried to get it built. He tried to find the guy to fund it, to build it. But over the years, it also grew. It started out, it was just 50 acres, and then it was 100, and then it was 150 acres. But in 2018, we got funded to build a 320-acre sports park in East Mesa, 320 acres, 24 soccer fields. And you want large soccer venues so that when you have large soccer tournaments, you can play them all in one spot. Before this facility, we had kids in Peoria and Glendale and Scottsdale and Tempe at 5 different locations to hold one tournament. There are some large sports parks popping up around the country, but we opened our doors about a year ago. And so Legacy Sports USA, the facility now got title sponsorship called Bell Bank Park. And I have been part of the project for years, but I oversee the Performance Training Center. And this is phenomenal. It looks like a Division I weight room. It's 25,000 square feet. I got 80 yards of turf. I've got 3 lanes of track in here, and they didn't build me an indoor track, but at least got my straightaways and can have some people over to come out of blocks and run some straightaways and hurdles. So that's really been my focus the last 3 years. I was designing this place 5 and 6 years ago as well, but now that we got it open, now we got to keep it full. The fun part of the job is over. Now it's the hard part. How do we get people in here? How do we keep it full? But the goal is to build more locations, big locations. We're in communications with people in McKinney, Texas, and Murfreesboro, Tennessee. So you never know. We might see some facilities in those locations, but that's what I would like to do, is move on to the other locations and help design and create places where people can train. And brick and mortar kind of suffered a little bit through COVID, but man, when they came out, everybody wanted to get back in the gym, and that's what we do here. We do performance training for athletes and non-athletes alike.
So athletes wise, is it like local high school and collegiate athletes, professional athletes, a mix of all?
Yeah, so we train youth and development. So our goal here is long-term youth athletic development. Okay. And so our goal, you wouldn't believe how many parents come up to me. Oh, my son is 13. He plays baseball, but he's really slow, and it's like, well, we teach our kids how to play every sport, throw a football, kick a football, basketball, baseball, but we never teach our kids how to run. We need to be teaching our kids at age 7, 8, 9, and 10 running mechanics from the beginning. And now, I got a quarterback group here. These guys are playing high-level quarterback in high school, and they can't do, they can't do high knees. It's absolutely amazing. The coordination skills aren't there. And so our goal here is to get an athlete when they're young, and then really work with them over a period of years. And of course, that's an investment for a parent over the years to get a scholarship. But it's also, we're trying to capture the club market as well. So these are parents who have committed and their kids who have committed to, play club level sports. But we also have pros here, so just for example, a couple of weeks ago, Derrick Rose came through, basketball player, and his wife actually is from, Southern Tempe. And so he was in town for 3 days, and he worked out in the facility. And we'll put on, we won't have a very big one this first year, but year 2, we'll put on a big combine training program. Last year, when Major League Baseball was on strike, we had Major League Baseball Players Association at our facility. We had about 75 guys, but, we can feed them in the morning. They can do training, and, whether it's on the baseball field or in the performance center, and then we feed them lunch and they're out the door. And, we just put together programs like that. So we're trying to be like a one-stop shop for an athlete coming in from out of the country or, across the country to train with us. I'm just trying to bolster my coaching staff because, I got a couple of really good coaches who I trust to coach high-level athletes, but then I've got up-and-coming coaches as well. But more than anything, we want people to come see the facility and, learn what our program is. And so, we've got a deal with Park University, which is a NAIA online college. They don't have any facilities, so we're their athletic department. And then we've signed deals with some of the biggest soccer groups in the state of Arizona. And we probably see about 1,500 athletes a week in this performance center.
Wow. What do you do? One of my favorite discussions to have with the coaches that we have here on the podcast is to talk about coaches education. It's probably one of my favorite topics because it was such a big deal for me in my career when I was coaching. What do you do? This is a unique aspect. What do you do, whether it's a formal type of coaching education or informal, meaning, I work with these mentors, or I read these books or this video series, whatever. What do you do in the capacity that you're in today for coaching education to make yourself better, to help these kids, whether it's the parents, the kids of the parents, or these professionals that come into the facility?
Well, we've got to have top level coaches. Okay. So my lead trainer, his name's Frank Davis. He played in the NFL for 4 years, and then he got out of the NFL from a player standpoint, and he spent his entire life in professional weight rooms and college weight rooms. So, before he was here, he was at, Oklahoma for 10 years. Then he spent 3 years at UCLA. He married a lady from Queen Creek, Arizona. And so now he lives here, and I found him working at an EOS, Next thing you know, Frank rolls in. He's a fantastic programmer, but we use a guy like Frank now to mentor those young students coming out of college. I got 3 or 4 kids here. This is their first job out of college. Okay. And they can learn from a guy like that, who's been with the Philadelphia Phillies, who's been with the Oklahoma Sooners. This is how we operate. And within that coaching model, I think you can learn more much more, if not as much, than if you were to study for NSCA type of. You need those certifications, of course, but this practical experience goes a long ways. And we got a lot of people who are interning under him, who are, at the coming out from Park University. We got interns there that want to learn from these high level coaches. What's interesting is, everybody asks me about my certifications and everything. And it's like, I've lost track of my USA track and field certifications. However, I'm not a certified trainer like CSCCA or NSCA, but I'm an expert. Okay. Which makes me just a little bit different, expert in, speed training and certainly the sport of track and field. But I let these coaches, write a lot of the workouts, try to put my input in there, and we try to mentor as many young athletes and move them on. And what gives us a great amount of pride is when somebody comes and works with us and then they get that next job. A guy by the name of Ryan Yeager came, and he was my head programmer. Boom. Now he's with the Minnesota Timberwolves. And that makes me proud. And while it may not make the executives here very glad that they lost a great coach, that's our job, is to help educate somebody and move them on in life.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're spot on there. I think the different certifications, whether it's the CSCSs or the USATF level 1s and 2s, I think certainly they have a place in our sport, in our coaching body. I think the other side of it, learning from people who have done is just as important. I don't think just because someone doesn't have a certification that they're any less of a person. In fact, using your college degree example, I'm not convinced that you are not a good person just because you don't have a degree. I mean, it's important, I guess, to get a degree, but that doesn't tell me you are better or not better or smarter or not smarter person just because you did 120 credits or whatever, to finalize it. And Lord knows, I mean, I can only imagine some of the classes you took. There's some classes I took in college. It's like, really? I had to have that to be smart, to have a degree, right? Get out of here. But I think of like organizations like Altus with Dan Paff and Stu and those guys that, you go there and I think they are starting to give like certificates for it, but that's not a formal, like you'll never see, hey, have Altus level 1 speed and strength to get this job. But boy, the guys and gals that go through those programs, they are learning from some of the best people there are. We just had Dan Paff on the podcast, and I'll tell you what, you talk to that man for an hour, I'm not sure you don't learn more in that hour than you learn in an introductory certification class. So I think having those people to talk to and being open to their experiences can make you a phenomenal coach and mentor to others.
And I totally agree. I listened to that podcast with Dan, and I think what was so amazing about him is, humble beginnings, but this is a guy who loved coaching so much, loved the sport of track and field. He was willing to go anywhere. And that's one thing that a lot of people these days aren't willing to do. Is just get up, pick up, move 2 states over because you get a coaching opportunity. And it's like somebody, I'm going to move across the country for $60,000 a year job. And it's just like, that's what we all had to do for a long, long time. And I say the same about athletes as well. And we as athletes, we want to be in this real comfortable bubble. And yes, our private lives are very important to our success, but so often we don't take chances, get up and move across the country and get with the right coach in the right situation. You never know where that's going to lead you.
Yeah. I think I've heard about people who didn't want to go to Bobby Kersey's group in LA because it was either too expensive or I don't want to be in LA. And it's like, man, you might be passing out on the opportunity. You don't get many chances to win a gold medal. It may only come once, by the way. And you're not going to go with maybe the best coach. I mean, just recently, several high profile athletes joined them. So maybe that's changing, but it's like, man, you're not going to give it your all for 4 years, even if that means living in LA. There's worse things to do, and there's worse people to go coach with, to be worked with. That's for sure. Dan, I don't know why this question popped into my head here to kind of end it today. I've met you and talked with you several times. You're one of the, you remind me of a Lonnie Green. Lonnie at Kentucky?
Course, yeah.
Lonnie, love him to death. Again, another Gill podcast alum and dear friend. He's always positive. And I know life is not always positive. There's things that get thrown at you that, life happens, right? And but he's always, oh, Mike, I'm blessed. That's his line. I'm blessed. But because of his constant positivity, it picks me up. Like it's hard for me to feel bad about what's going on in my life when I'm around a guy like Lonnie. And you're very similar to that. Every time I see you at a convention or at the track meet, you're quick with a smile, you're quick with a handshake, you're quick with a how are you doing? You're always upbeat and positive. How are you doing? Are you happy with where you are today and where things are going?
When I'm around track and field, I'm a happy person. And my best friend will tell you that. I'll get out of the car at the parking lot at ASU to just watch the Sun Angel Classic. And he's just like, man, you're in a good mood. And it's just like, hey, I'm going to a track meet. So when I go to the convention and I am at the US championships or the NCAA championships, I am in a good mood. That puts me in a good mood. I have bad days, certainly, but I learned a long time ago that, I have a choice. I have a choice whether to smile or not smile or be happy. And I'll never forget, I was, my first Big Sky indoor championship, we're hosting it at the University of Idaho, and I'm doing some hurdle drills, and a guy comes over to me and says, "What are you angry about?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" He said, "Oh, you've got a scowl on your face." And I didn't know that I was doing that as an athlete, just, intense, but it's like, okay, that's me as an athlete. And I always, when I step through the gate into practice, I let everything go. And then when I step through the gate to go out of practice, again, it's like, okay, that's not the person I am outside. And so, I mean, I just have too many things to be grateful for. You know, and I even told my wife, like, if I ever have any health issues, just, you know, wheel my wheelchair in front of the TV. There's too many good things on television. Just don't unplug me. Just let me catch up on my my streaming shows. Oh, that's the thing. You know, life's all about opportunities, and you know, you make yourself happy. And I choose to wake up every day and see the, you know, see the positive in everything.
Well, Dan, man, I love it. I love you. You know, it's your story is quite amazing in regards to how many times you could have, should have quit. How many times people could have quit on you, and maybe others, not maybe, certainly others would have quit on you. I mean, there's people that would not have taken those chances, and those second, those third, and those fourth chances on you. I'm still just blown away by Larry Hunt. You know, we talk about huge figures in our sport, and we go to a lot of the people we talked about today, yourself, Jenner, Harry Maris, Fred Samara. We talk about those kind of people, rightfully so. And we forget about a guy named like Larry Hunt, who, like I said, he changed track and field world. I'm just amazed by people, and so thankful that people like that were placed into your life. I mean, that to me is, that's why I say, you know, things work out the way they're supposed to be. That's what gives me the belief in that. It's like, oh man, Larry Hunt was where he was supposed to be that day to talk to you about doing the decathlon of all things, for crying out loud, not to become a better hurdler, to be the whole enchilada, to do the multi, man. So I'm just thankful for you being here today. Thankful for you sharing your story. Thankful for, you know, talking about the coaches that poured into your life and have made you who you are today. And what's awesome is, you know, I know you've had a career and you've had different careers. You're still, you know, I know at the age and stage you're at, it's easy to say, oh, I'm getting close to that finish line. Brother, with the health system we have now, you might be barely at halftime. Like, you still have so many years in front of you to affect other people. And I'm excited to see it. I think this position here at Legacy Sports is going to grow to help other people and to affect our sport. You're going to create other Larry Hunts that are going to affect sports that no one's going to know their name, but thank God they were there to affect other sports. And it's going to come from the leadership and the expertise that you're helping and showing other coaches and other athletes out there. I'm excited to watch it. This thing's going to grow, and it's going to grow because of guys like you.
Well, I appreciate that. And just, you know, another full circle, just quick story. My junior college coach, Dwayne Hartman, he got to officiate the high jump at the Olympic Games in Atlanta during the decathlon. And while I was on a separate pit, but I came over to him and he and I shared a very special moment, you know, and he passed away, about 6 years later. But it was just, we got to share that moment. And he was trying to be official, saying, well, I can't talk to you. And I was like, Coach, we're at the Olympics, you know, we're at the Olympics together. And, you know, and that's the thing, in a little tiny office at Spokane Community College. And, you know, that was his dream to go to the Olympics as well.
Man, you've lived a life, man. Like I said, you got so much more in front of you. It's quite amazing. Hey, if you're listening and you enjoyed this story, like I said, go check out the book, Clearing Hurdles, The Quest to Become the World's Greatest Athlete. I'm going to go on a limb. I can get this on Amazon and all those kind of places. Yeah, of course. If you can't get it on Amazon anymore, is it really a book? I don't think so. But go check it out. It's a great book. I'm excited for it. I'm excited for you, Dan. And again, just thankful, man. I'm always blessed when people come and visit us here in the podcast, and you know, we're better off because you were here today, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You guys are doing great things. I listen to podcasts all the time. I'm glad I found you. Thanks,
Thank you, brother. All right. Y'all have a great day.